I'm Tubby Tarot and you are watching Book Talk. Today I want to tell you about the 3 must-have Victorian classics you need in your collection. Okay, and I am going to surprise you because I'm going to leave out Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, Dracula, Frankenstein, those iconic classics of horror. All right, I'm going to leave those out because we all know those books. They are imprinted in pop culture. We all know them, no matter how old you are. Even if you're a 16-year-old watching this, you've heard of Dracula. They've been made into movies and plays and audiobooks and the actual books, and they've been rewritten. They've made comic books out of it, graphic novels. So we are very familiar with those, specifically those 3. So I'm not going to recommend those. Those you should have in your collection anyway. So I want to mention 3 others that you perhaps have not heard about, or if you have heard about them, you probably thought like, whatever. Okay, but these are my personal 3 that I believe you have to have in your collection, and these are slightly different genres. All 3 of them are slightly different genres, and they're really, really cool books. Really cool books. Okay, I get very excited when talking about these. And the very first one is a book by a guy called Wilkie Collins. It was written in 1859, and it is called The Woman in White. When I first heard about this book, I thought, okay, this is a ghost story. Now, strangely enough, this is not a ghost story. Okay, it is actually a very, very clever crime story. It's a very clever whodunit, okay? And there are twists and turns in this book, and it's just a really amazing book. Wilkie Collins wrote a lot of different crime novels, as it were. He also dabbled in sort of some horror short stories and things, but this is probably his most famous book. This and a book called The Moonstone, which I'll review in a later video. But this book, The Woman in White, is an absolute must-have, okay? Because it is one of the very first crime novels or whodunit novels, all right? So that's the one reason you really need to have this book in your collection. The next book I'm going to recommend you get is a book, very well-known book by Oscar Wilde, written in 1890, and it is called The Picture of Dorian Gray. And this is it is a fantasy book, but it is what I would term a very dark fantasy, almost like a dark fairy tale book, in that it's about a guy who makes a pact with the devil so that he doesn't age. A painting of him does age, which enables him to go out, be beautiful looking, and commit the most terrible deeds. He can smoke opium, he can fuck whoever he wants, men and women. He can cheat at cards, he can drink himself into a coma. Nothing actually affects him physically, but as he's doing all these terrible things, the painting itself ages and gets syphilis and gonorrhea, and all these horrendous things happen to it. It wrinkles, it suppurates, it gets pussy, pustules, whatever. Truly disgusting. So it's kind of a dark warning, a dark fable, a dark fairy tale. It is slightly supernatural in that the painting has got a supernatural element to it, but it's more about the way this man progresses as a person. Okay, and that's the really cool thing about this story by Oscar Wilde. He looks at the person. Now, there are 2 different versions of this book, and I did not know this, and I don't know if many of you do. There is the cut version, or the censored version, and then there's the uncensored version. Now, I did not know this. When Oscar Wilde wrote this book, his publisher wouldn't publish the unedited version, the uncensored version, because it was far too erotic, homoerotic for the Victorians of the time. So he cut a lot of the homoerotic stuff out, and without Oscar Wilde knowing it, Oscar Wilde didn't know about this, and then he published it, and Oscar Wilde was horrified and furious when he realized that the book he'd written was now chopped up into pieces and actually censored. So I would recommend, if you're going to buy this book, I would recommend buying the unedited or the uncut or the uncensored version of Dorian Gray. All right, it just gives you a lot more. The third and final book you have to read in your collection is a book called The Turn of the Screw, and it was written by Henry James in 1898, I think. 1898. Henry James was a very interesting writer. He suffered from incredible depression, and yet he wrote the most incredible books. His most famous is The Turn of the Screw, and this is a proper, on the surface, it's a proper ghost story, okay? And yet it is also a story about a woman and her, I would personally say, her mental breakdown, okay? I don't want to tell you too much about this book because it's quite freaky and devastating. And it is also, in my opinion, the most frightening horror story, ghost story ever written. Once you've read it, it will stay with you for the rest of your life. That's how powerful and impactful it is. There have been many movies made about this book. Just recently, we are, as I'm sitting here now, it's June 2020, but I think last year, or maybe even the beginning of this year, there was a film that was released. I can't remember what it was called. It was based on this terrible film, horrible, just a terrible movie. But in the 60s, there was a film called The Innocents, and that is a fantastic film to watch of The Turn of the Screw, okay? It starred a woman called Deborah Kerr. So if you'd like to watch the movie and give the book a miss, you can watch it. It's called The Innocents. Get the 1960s version. It is a truly frightening tale of possession, and this is a very small book. It's very thin. It's very completely unputdownable. You could probably read it in an afternoon, but it is definitely one that you must read and you must have in your collection, and one that will be quite at home amongst Bram Stoker's Dracula and Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. It's on that level. In fact, right on that level. So my 3 recommendations for must-have classics: The Woman in White by Wilkie Collins, The Uncensored Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde, and The Turn of the Screw by Henry James. Go out, get them, find them. They're easily available secondhand, I'm sure. Otherwise, they're available quite cheaply on Amazon, and you can get them in the Penguin Classics edition. I think you pay next to nothing for them. Get them, add them to your collection. I know you'll enjoy them. They are really, really cool and exciting books. I'm Matt from Tubby Tarot, and this has been Book Talk. Bye.